In this narration of ADHD, we will be covering intellectual functioning and academic achievement, as well as the evaluation process, which will lead us to the IEP. If we think about intellectual functioning and academic achievement as it relates to students with ADHD, research tells us there is inconclusive evidence on what the average IQ is for students with ADHD. The majority of students with ADHD have average intelligence. Think about the people whom you know with ADHD. Would you agree? Our students with ADHD tend to have lower standardized test scores, but if you think about it, it makes sense because of the characteristics often associated with ADHD. Those being inability to stay on task, getting distracted, all of those things that are so important for a student to do well on a standardized test. Often our students with ADHD have impairments associated with memory, motivation, goal-directed behavior, processing environmental cues, and incorporating feedback to improve performance. So if we think about these components, a school day, again, becomes very challenging. If memory issues are there, memorizing facts for multiplication, memorizing words for spelling, remembering those important cues for reading, all of those things are impacted when our students have, all of those things may be impacted for our students with ADHD. Motivation can become such a critical piece when our students with ADHD are in content that they have no interest in. Goal-directed behavior, are they able to set goals and make progress in their behavior? Processing environmental cues, everything from things that are distracting them in the classroom with fluorescent lights or the radiator starting and going off, kids tapping their pencils, maybe they are the one tapping their pencils. That ability to process environmental cues to know what's coming next. If the teacher shuts down the projector, can that student with ADHD anticipate what might come next? And then incorporating feedback to improve performance. It can often be difficult for our students to take feedback and then actually improve upon their performance. They may take the feedback okay, but then they might actually forget what it is they're supposed to do with it. There are also social, emotional, and behavioral characteristics that go with our students with ADHD. Unfortunately, there can be a strong overlap with EBD. 30 to 50% of students with ADHD, according to the research, also have ODD and/or conduct disorder. This comes from your Turnbull text. About 1/2 of them have anxiety disorder. Now, if you think about those pieces overlapping with ADHD, the challenges that these students face can be extraordinary. These can also be some of the reasons our students tend to self-medicate and get connected with drugs and alcohol at an earlier age than others. Common challenges as we think about social, emotional, and behavioral could include the difficulty in perceiving social cues, accurately estimating one's abilities and performance, and adjusting behavior in light of feedback. That difficulty in interpreting and processing emotions. If I'm impulsive, I'm definitely not going to be able to process emotions in the way that I should. May have higher rates of tobacco use, as I just mentioned. Substantially higher likelihood of involvement with the juvenile justice system. If we think about students with ODD and/or anxiety disorder, and then on top of that ADHD, getting connected with juvenile justice is, unfortunately, a good likelihood. And increased risk-taking behavior. As you think about that ADHD and how the brain is functioning, that ability to want to have that brain getting more engaged, our students do things that are riskier because they feel the same way as average students do without those risk-taking behaviors. If we think about causes for ADHD, there is a ton of research out there that gets at what is it that causes ADHD. Heredity is definitely the strongest contributor, and research is very clear about that. We know it to be true. We know many parents who will often say, yes, I too had ADHD, or I still have ADHD, or I have ADD, and my child has the same. We know there are structural differences in the brain. So schools don't typically have the money to be able to do brain scans, but the medical field does. And because ADHD has so many clients out in the field, we do have a lot of research to support those structural differences in the brain. This is one image of what it looks like, but they have that reduced brain volume, and it's going to be in that frontal lobe where so many critical pieces are happening when our students are engaged or should be engaged in learning. We know there can be environmental causes, but research is not, we don't have enough research to say any one type of environmental cause is the reason. So it's also not generally the primary reason. It would be in conjunction with genetics, but if you were to go and search for media and ADHD, could we say that media causes ADHD? No, but there may be a higher likelihood that people with ADHD will be involved in media. Think about video games, think about TV. What about sugar? What about pop? What about all of those different things that we think, well, I wonder if that causes it. It may not cause it, but it may contribute to it. Evaluation and eligibility of ADHD. Just as in other modules, a non-discriminatory evaluation will be administered if there are concerns that a student with ADHD may need special education services. We would not be evaluating for ADHD, rather we would be evaluating for other health disability, which includes the following systematic procedures. We would still do observations. The teachers would observe in the classroom. Parents would give us feedback on what they're observing at home. We would have a screening, which includes medical reports, group intelligence tests, so for example the MCAs, the NWEA, group achievement tests, classroom work samples from a teacher. We would still go through the pre-referral stage with interventions implemented in academics and the classroom environment. And if the student has been on medication with their new diagnosis of ADHD, we might actually learn that that medication is making a considerable difference and they no longer are having the same challenges they had pre-medication. We can still administer the test, but those would be some of the things we want to think about in order to do any type of interventions. If the interventions aren't successful, then we refer, we move forward with the evaluation, we receive permission, and then we determine eligibility. The unique piece with an OHD evaluation is that if they're not eligible for special education services, we would consider a 504 plan because they do have a diagnosed disability from a physician. I want you to think about this for a moment. What if the school thinks a student should have a medical appointment in order to determine a medical diagnosis of ADHD? What steps should be taken? So as you think about that, for the purpose of this narration, I'm going to walk you through this. There are many times that a school, a general education teacher, a para that happens to be in a classroom with a student who they think might have ADHD, those individuals who observe the student on a daily basis might really believe that a student does have ADHD. But we have to remind ourselves we are not the physicians. We cannot diagnose that. And we should never tell a family that they need to go and get a medical appointment in order to determine if the child would have ADHD. If you do that, The school is then liable for the costs. So what you want to do is have a normal conversation with the family, and you as the special ed teacher probably will not be the one doing that because you don't have a relationship with that family. But the general ed teacher whom you may have to coach would say something along the lines of, when was your child's last physical? What are you seeing at home? Are you concerned about things? And guiding them to make that decision to go to the doctor. Again, you do not want to tell them they should go to the doctor. You want to coach that general ed teacher to talk about concerns they're seeing in the classroom, concerns they're seeing at home. Most parents are going to pick up on it, that there are some either hyperactivity or attention deficit concerns going on. Then another question is, what if a family chooses to have their son or daughter go on medication during the evaluation? So keep in mind, the likelihood is that the medication is going to make some kind of difference. We don't know how much of a difference, but there will be some difference. So as a special education team, you are going to continue moving forward with the evaluation, but you will document when the student started on medication so that you can, as you summarize the evaluation, you can talk about at this stage the student went on medication, and does the team feel that that made any type of difference. But definitely move forward with the evaluation even if medication was started in the process of that evaluation. Now we are moving on to the ADHD IEP. I want you to pause until you have a copy of Samantha's IEP next to you. The next slide is going to prompt you to do multiple things, and you can either continue on with the narration or you can pause and take part in this activity immediately. There will also be a link on Moodle giving you these same prompts. Basically what I'm asking you to do is to review this IEP looking for characteristics that we have been discussing in the two narrations to this point. Does Samantha look like a student with ADHD as you read about her, as you read the current description of child, as you look at the goals and adaptations? Does she sound like a typical student with ADHD? Does this IEP represent what she needs? Those are some of the things I want you to be thinking about. When you look at the adaptations on page 13, I want you to get a sense, if you were a general education teacher, what would you think about this particular page? These adaptations are required of you as a general ed teacher. Would you like the case manager who wrote this IEP? Do you feel like you could be successful as Samantha's general education teacher? As a special ed teacher, do you feel good about this page? I realize you did not write this page, but some special ed teacher did write this page many years ago. Does it make sense? Could you actually support Samantha with how these things have been written? Could you defend these adaptations as they relate to ADHD? That's what you always want to be able to do as a special education teacher, is be able to stand behind and defend why the adaptations are written. They absolutely should be included if they relate to the student's needs. If we think about the IEP and how it's unique compared to other disability categories, we will almost always have goals related to organization, impulsivity, and those are such important goals as we think about our students with ADHD being successful in a school setting. We might have student-guided goal setting. For our students who are in upper middle school and high school, they should be able to tell us what goals do they want to work towards. We will also have information on medication. We may even have a health plan that goes with the IEP. But we should know, you as a special ed teacher should know about the medication. You're not a trained physician, but you need to know some basic pieces of the medication that the student may be on. When is it dispersed? Where is it dispersed? Who disperses it? Is it the school nurse? Is it mom and dad? All of those things you should be able to answer as the case manager. If there are side effects, you want to know what those are so that you can help anyone who's working with this student be aware of those side effects and know when and how those may impact the student in his or her school day. And as we think about modifications and accommodations on an ADHD IEP, or rather OHD, but for ADHD, think about assignment completion. We don't want to give extended due dates that happen forever and ever. The student will never catch up. So we want to be realistic with assignment completion. It's much better to do fewer problems on all of the content than doing many problems on one area of content. That classroom environment, what does the student need to be successful so they are not distracted, so that they can be motivated to learn? Do they need a special chair? Do they need a place to stand? And breaks. Be realistic about the breaks. If the student cannot sit for 1 hour, allow that student to get up and leave. They don't have to leave for 10 minutes. They can take a walk around the hall, come back, and that is their break. So you always want to be realistic that the student has needs, but it doesn't mean that their entire day has to be completely broken up because of it. The SET framework. We are moving into something called the SET framework, and this is going to be for Samantha. So you've read Samantha's IEP, and the SET framework stands for Student, Environment, Tasks, and Tools. This is a framework that has actually been proposed by their Department of Education and is expected that you go through something like this actually for every student on an IEP, and we are using it here for ADHD. But the reason we have this SET framework is to focus on what assistive technology is necessary for a student to be successful in school. So you can see here we're going to talk about the student. So this is Samantha. Samantha has ADHD, and based on this IEP, what are Samantha's needs? You'll have a form on the Moodle site in which to fill out. What are Samantha's interests? What are her abilities? Then I want you to think of the environment where she'll be. So you're coming up with some type of technology that Samantha will use. Where will the technology be used? Is it certain classes? Is it all day long? Is it before the school day starts, after the school day ends, the entire day? Where will it be used? Tasks. So if you think about the technology you want Samantha to be able to use, what tasks will that technology be used for? Why will it be needed? Tools. What tools might be needed in order to meet the student's needs, which ultimately becomes this technology tool. So I want you to go ahead and think about that outside of this narration and then submit it on Moodle. And finally, a hypothetical think spot after you've been going through this narration. What if a family seeks your advice about medication? What would you say? Complete that on the provided form. Other options that may come up as you're considering conversations with families who have children with ADHD, they might ask, what about nutrition? I chose to do my master's thesis on nutrition versus medication for ADHD. And it was a fascinating study to do because there was tons and tons of research on medication and the benefits of it. But the nutrition, I would find one case study. I'd find maybe 3 students who worked with a nutritionist in San Francisco. But why isn't there research on nutrition? I'll tell you why. The money isn't there. The medication, they are supported by huge pharmaceutical companies that pay for amazing research to be done. I don't doubt the research from the medical companies, from the pharmaceutical companies, but it's hard to compare the two when you know that they are not equal in how they can do their research. The research I did with nutrition showed that it does work. It's just with such a low N that it's hard to say to a family, it absolutely will work. However, it's not going to hurt their child to try different nutritional techniques for students with ADHD. Dr. Feingold was the first person to try to expose us to the red dye diet. And this was back in the 70s, and it can be incredibly effective. But those are some of the things when I would sit across the table from parents, I would say the benefit of trying nutritional pieces is a student is never going to be harmed in the process. It's a major commitment on the side of the family, but I would always talk to them about if your son or daughter had diabetes, would you hesitate to change the nutritional components of their day? Of course not, because their life depends on it. Yet when we have our students with ADHD, we think, well, it might make it better, but it's really difficult to change a nutritional path for a family. But I would always challenge them to do so. I had a few parents take me up on it, but not many.